In Mitch Albom's novel that I'm listening to right now on Audible, it's called The Magic Strings of Frankie Presto. The old, blind, wise guitar teacher says to his student, "Do not attack the strings, coax them. Make them hunger for your next note. Same as in life. When you want someone to listen, will you attack them? No, you will not. You will make them hear the beauty of what you are offering, and they will want it for themselves." That idea, it seems impossible right now, right? I mean, the divisions run deep, the anger runs hot. Maybe sentiments like offering beauty instead of an attack feel more like an Aaron Sorkin fantasy, but I hope that's not forever. I think this feeling, this constant outrage, is a product of this specific moment, and that we can, and very much should, actively change how we react to it. Now, it was ages ago, another lifetime ago, November of 2020, when our worship team got together to plan this series on conflict resilience. We knew that our discourse over the last half-decade had become so toxic, and we, as a community, would have to work to restore some form of normalcy. I jumped at the chance to preach about whataboutism. In my opinion, one of the most insidious debate techniques that has moved from the political sphere into our daily lives. Whataboutism is a learned behavior, and I believe taking this out of our daily interactions will help us have deeper conversations and achieve moments of understanding and common ground with people with whom we disagree. So with all of the constant, unrelenting tragedies happening right now, why talk about whataboutism? Because I believe our anger isn't by accident, it's by design. All humans have tribalistic tendencies, and people in power, from politicians to brand names to, and especially our for-profit news media, they prey on those tendencies and shape our realities. Our constant collective anger, regardless of political leanings, makes us easy to manipulate and makes some people a great deal of money. Why talk about this now? Because I want all of us to practice turning down the temperature. This sermon is tricky right now because there are vocal white supremacists and conspiracy theorists who are calling for unity because they don't want to be held accountable for terrible actions. I'm going to talk today about lowering the temperature of our discourse and trying to find common ground and common humanity, but please know I'm not applying that to Nazis and domestic terrorists who absolutely have to be held accountable. They have to have their feet held to the fire. Last week, Reverend Strauss talked about slowing down, taking a holy pause to come and find the quiet center, and I agree wholeheartedly. That quietude feels like it's just been missing from my life. Are you getting in a lot of fights with people in your head? Like alone in a space, you're getting in real heated arguments silently with someone who isn't there. I think people do that a lot in life, but I've been doing it so much recently. Typically, I'm fighting in my head with people whom I love and I have disagreements with. I catch myself in my silent, one-sided arguments using whataboutisms and creating false equivalencies, not something that I'm doing purposefully, but something that we all hear so often that it's become ubiquitous. We'd far rather paint someone else as bad, someone else as the enemy, than consider an argument or situation's complexity. In my research about whataboutism, I watched a video from comedian John Oliver, who said, speaking about the former president, "The real damage isn't in how he says things, but from techniques he uses to isolate himself from criticism and consequence." And if we are not extremely careful, they could have serious impacts that far outlast his presidency. The techniques he's talking about are delegitimizing the media, whataboutism, and trolling or abusing people online. That really affected me. We have to shine a light on these tactics, both when others use them and when we find ourselves using them. So I'm typically not a fan of talking politics at all from the pulpit, but I think that it can't be taken apart in this time. Whataboutism is like a grenade meant to muddy the waters, or a cudgel meant to beat the person you're talking to into submission. And John Oliver called it a depressingly effective tool. Though the term whataboutism, or whataboutery if you're British, is fairly new, the tactic is not. It's been around for many, many years, many decades. It was famously used in the Cold War by the Soviet Union against the United States. Whenever the U.S. would call out the Soviet Union on the world stage for poor working conditions, poor living conditions, or even for murder and espionage, the Soviets would simply respond, "But you hang black people. That's a grenade." Whataboutism is powered by false equivalencies. It implies that all actions, regardless of context, share moral equivalency. And since nobody is perfect, all criticism is deemed hypocritical, like equating committing petty crimes with being murdered by a police officer. Some examples of whataboutism: if someone is caught in a lie, instead of apologizing or making amends for the lie, they just point to someone else's lie or someone else's perceived lie to excuse their own behavior. Or if a parent asks their child about their bad grades, the child responds with, "But what about you? You didn't even go to college." More pressing in our time, responding to Black Lives Matter with "All Lives Matter" or "Blue Lives Matter." And of course, responding to a laundry list, decades of wrongdoings with "But her emails." It is a macabre game of two wrongs make my wrong okay, or no matter what I do, you are worse than me. There are many other types of logical fallacies that have similar destructive effects. It could be a whole worship series. Whataboutism and other forms of violent communication are meant to derail conversations, frustrate or anger the person you're speaking to, and avoid having to deal with topics that you are uncomfortable with by countering with topics that someone else is uncomfortable with. The result, on a large scale, is leaders who can do anything without consequence. But on a one-on-one scale, the result is an inability to go deeper, to find base-level understanding between two people, because you can't get to the base level if everything on the surface is on fire. Talking to somebody who uses a lot of whataboutisms is like getting into a fist fight with the ocean. Come and find the quiet center in the crowded life we lead. Find the room for hope to enter. Find the frame where we are freed. Life feels really cluttered right now. And how do we find that room for hope to enter? How do we clear the chaos and the clutter? Firstly, it's good to recognize that these feelings, this clutter, this constant barrage is by design. There are powerful and influential people who want us to be angry, want us to be off-kilter, want us to be voracious for more information on that thing that is keeping us on edge. You can get a lot of people to vote against their own interests if you simply get them to hold great contempt for the other group. So our quote-unquote news spends a lot of time stoking the fire. The biggest mouthpieces for this news also happen to be the three most profitable cable stations, not cable news stations, but cable stations in general: Fox News, MSNBC, and CNN. So only 2 points on what could be 500 about news media, because this isn't really the point of my sermon. The first point is that riling all of us up, getting all of us angry and incensed, is very, very profitable. It is a successful business model. These stations are shockingly profitable entertainment companies that use news as their backdrop. It pushes our buttons like an episode of Lost because they are actively trying to push our buttons. The second point is that journalism on these networks is in short supply. Real, fact-based journalism is time-consuming, it's expensive, and it is usually devoid of the tabloid hyperbole that keeps people glued to the television. A panel of just 4 people talking about their base-level analysis, their quick takes, their opinions, it is comparatively very inexpensive. These news networks and the fact that they are compelling television, very compelling television, is an economic trap that is having negative effects on our nation and our everyday lives. Malcolm X said, "The media is the most powerful entity on earth. They have the power to make the innocent guilty and to make the guilty innocent, and that is power, because they can control the minds of the masses." We had a big talk in our worship team this week about how sermons are most effective if they only have 1 or 2 big takeaways. But I have 3 because I don't preach that often. And the first is this: one way to lower the temperature in our current political climate is to lower the amount of news or news-style media you are taking in. I know that I have been gluttonous for political news these past 5 years, and like being gluttonous for Taco Bell, it has left me feeling ill, having heartburn, and clearly being less healthy. This doesn't mean become uninformed. It means avoid the all-you-can-eat buffet of pseudo-news on your social media feeds and on 24-hour cable TV. Get your news from actual journalists and read until you are satisfied, not until you are too full to function. Now, how do we deal with these violent communication techniques that have moved from the media we've been constantly consuming and become commonplace in our regular conversations? That answer has 2 parts. Those are the next two things. The first is when we are confronted by violent communication, you have to decide if responding is worth it. And the second is, if it is worth it, turn down the temperature. A few years ago, the whole staff and board at UUCA did a day-long anti-racism training, and the whole training was excellent. It was really great, but the part that I come back to time and time again is that racism isn't a binary. It isn't that simple. Racism is a spectrum, right? And we as people working to end racism have to decide how much energy we're going to give to push back against the racism we see. So the racism spectrum, think of it as kind of a half circle. It starts with going from actively racist to somewhat racist, mildly racist, silently racist, then moves through silently anti-racist, mildly anti-racist, somewhat anti-racist, and actively anti-racist. The nefarious rise in white supremacy over the last 15 years isn't because white nationalists and conservative talk show hosts have just flipped a switch in people and they've gone from being not racist to being racist. It is a result of constant messages that embolden people to move down the spectrum. People who are silently racist are emboldened to be a little more mildly racist or move to somewhat racist, and far too many people moving from somewhat racist into the actively racist category. Now, after laying all of this out onto the staff and board, our anti-racism clinician dropped the bomb on us. She said, and I paraphrase, Think about the people you know who are all the way over here, who are deeply committed to anti-racism work, many of them your fellow congregants. Think about those people. How likely are they to ever move from this part of the spectrum? The odds are close to zero. They're not zero, but they're close. If they are actively anti-racist, they are going to be that way for the rest of their lives. And the sad truth is the same is true for people who are actively racist. The odds of them changing aren't zero, but they're close. Now, people on the anti-racism side of this spectrum spend the lion's share of their anti-racism energy, either online or in real life, raging at people who are actively racist. It's like getting in a fist fight with the ocean. You get into a shouting match or a flame war on Facebook or Twitter, people start throwing around whataboutisms and false equivalencies, and so we reference an article or link to that article and no one ever reads it, and in the end, we feel like we fought the good fight. But we're probably also furious, and we're probably also exhausted. And those people that we're fighting, they're almost surely not going to change. Telling us this about how anti-racists misspend their energy wasn't to convince us to let racist comments lie or to discourage us, but to encourage us to focus our energy where it will do the most good. Now, maybe that's helping someone in this silently racist category to realize their unconscious biases so they can just do better in the future. Maybe it's encouraging people over here to have difficult conversations about race or interact more with people in other cultures. It is definitely inspiring people to move this way on the spectrum. It is inspiring people to do effective anti-racism work and stop just punching the ocean. Now, this doesn't just apply to anti-racism work. That when someone throws a whataboutism wrench into a conversation you're having, the first thing you need to do is decide, is it worth it to engage, to give this energy in that moment? If we decide that the conversation is worth it, that the person you are talking to is someone you care about and want to have a deep and maybe difficult conversation with, then how do we lower the temperature if it gets out of hand and put our finite energy in the right place? Last week, Reverend Strauss called on us to use perseverance, resolve, clarity, and kindness. That's a lot to bring to a conversation when tensions are high, but I think it's possible. When someone uses a whataboutism or other logical fallacy with me, I just simply call it out. I will say, that's a whataboutism, or that's a false equivalency, or that's a red herring. And that sometimes means I have to explain what those terms mean. But that's a good thing. That's a good thing to help people be better communicators. If things get really heated, I like to say things like, take a breath. This is getting out of hand. Can we just lower the temperature a bit? Or, hey, our conversation has turned into an argument. Can we walk it back together? Sometimes, to preserve the relationship or to guard yourself, you need to just put on the brakes. But make sure that if there was some progress in your conversation, that you acknowledge it. Maybe saying, hey, we talked about some important things today. I'm sorry the conversation got off the rails, but maybe we can talk more about this in the future. You have to be level-headed, and that's hard, but you can't patronize. Only say these things if you mean it. Conversations are meant to connect us, not to be won. The conversations we see on the news are people trying to win, but we don't need to win. You want to connect. Just about every time I've preached from this pulpit in the last 13 years, I have said this. I am a Unitarian Universalist because I deeply believe in a world where we can disagree and still love each other. If we can stop using these violent tactics in our lives or virtual interactions and learn to lower the temperature of our arguments or conversations, we move closer to creating a beloved community. The old guitar teacher said to his student, do not attack the strings, coax them. Make them hunger for your next note. Same as in life. When you want someone to listen to you, will you attack them? No, you will not. You will make them hear the beauty that you are offering, and they will want it for themselves. I want this for all of us. May we lay down our swords and shields. May we use that to clear the chaos and the clutter. Amen.